Okay, here's where my my hack of the radio was doomed to fail. When I was trying to hack into the read head on the unit. A little bit of theory of operation first. Magnetic tape is 2 layers, roughly. We've got a base substrate, and that is usually some polymer film. And then on top of it, we have an emulsion of some sort of iron particles inside of a binder. Not sure what the binder is, but in any event, you get these little little iron particles that can be magnetized with what turns out to be an electromagnet that looks something like this. You know, you've got windings that go around it, and given that when you take a iron core and you apply a signal through it, it will produce a magnetic field inside and outside through this gap of this electromagnet which you've just created. So what you end up getting is field lines of flux that will permeate this magnetizable layer on top of your tape. So they look something like that. There's more of them here, whatnot, but you get the idea. So as you drag this tape across, what you're going to end up doing is you're going to be creating varying magnetization in this emulsion. And because what you're doing is you're actually aligning your magnetic particles in an orientation that minimizes the amount of energy that's consumed, because conservation of energy, blah blah blah. But I mean, there's lots and lots and lots of physics that we could go into about that, but we won't. Suffice it to say, you've got sort of random magnetization over here, magnetic domains pointing every which way, and then as you drag the tape across here, this very specific magnetic field that is varying will produce a varying magnetic field strength in the particles on this side of the tape as it goes through. So you can imagine these sets of arrows are the orientation of the magnetic, and you've got these all nicely lined up like this because you've got some width to your magnet and whatnot. So you get the sense that you can orient the magnetic particles in this emulsion layer by changing your magnetic field strength through a varying electrical current by the principles of electromagnetism. Simple in theory, right? That makes perfectly good sense. What practical problems are going to get in our way of actually using this to record sound and be able to read it back? Because the other thing that you can think of is, now let's put a very sensitive magnetization detector on top of this tape and run it back, and then that magnetization detector, well, anytime you have a magnet moving in between two poles, will induce an electric current. So basically what you're doing is you're reversing this. As the tape goes past it, your varying magnetic field here is going to produce a varying electrical current in your coil around your read head, and it'll produce a varying electrical signal. So you can charge up your tape with various different orientations of magnetic domains, and then as you pull that tape past a read head, it will produce a varying electrical current. So you've got a way of storing electrical signal on tape and then reading it back. So that doesn't seem too crazy. Well, maybe not. But anyways, what practical problems do we run into with doing this? Well, there are a number, and we're going to go through them. because they indicate why I was on a wild goose chase with my first hack of trying to just tap directly into the magnetization, or directly into the reed head of the tape deck. First of all is bias. So you've got a magnetic field where you've got, you've got a varying electrical signal. And sometimes that electrical signal is very faint, and sometimes that electrical signal is very large. And these are encoding, well, there's a couple of ways of encoding it. Probably the amplitude is going to encode the volume, but you can also encode frequency as a way of encoding, well, so you've got your amplitude and you've got your frequency. Those are the two things that determine what sound you're hearing. Is it a loud sound, or is it a soft sound? Is it a high sound, lots of frequency, or is it a low sound, very low frequency? Go to Science World and play with some of the exhibits there, and you'll get a good sense of frequency and vibration and amplitude and how they all interrelate in terms of how you experience them. So, for low amplitude signals, when you're trying to encode them onto a tape that has some sort of noise floor in itself, like you can't always get all of the magnetic domains oriented in exactly the same way, because it's just not possible. Some of them are going to be random just because you've got quantum effect, all kinds of things. So you've got a net magnetization polarity, but you've also got this noise floor. So one of the things that they did was they decided to either apply a DC bias to the signal. So instead of having this signal fluctuating around 0, you apply a positive DC bias so that all of these signals are fluctuating well above 0 and inside of a better behaved portion of the magnetization curve on the tape. Okay, fair enough. So you've got some DC offset that you have to deal with. That's one thing that they tried. Didn't work all that well because of you still had this noise floor that you had to deal with. There was always this random noise from the tape that was adjusting the fluctuation. So what you're trying to do, the next thing they tried to do, well, actually, let me back up a bit. The noise floor from DC bias came from the fact that you were applying a net magnetization to this tape, and you can't really always demagnetize the tape to 0 magnification. You can't truly re-randomize it because of the hysteresis in magnetization of materials. We'll get into that a little bit later. But just suffice it to say that DC bias, while it worked a bit, it still did not produce a very low noise tape environment. For AC tape biasing, here's what you do. What you try and do is you use a high frequency signal, much bigger than the largest signal that you're trying to encode, which for audio tape is 20 kilohertz, which is the limit of human hearing. So what was chosen is stuff that's in the 100 kilohertz or better range, so that you've got at least 5 cycles for every hertz, 5 cycles of carrier frequency for every cycle, and it's got something to do with the Nyquist theorem that talks about how you can sample out different frequencies from other frequencies, and if you're not within the Nyquist band, you can't actually separate the two signals. There's lots of mathematics to go along with that, but this is typical values. Anyways, so what that does is it keeps your signal in the linear ranges of the magnetization curve. Let me rephrase that. The transfer function for your magnetizability of your materials. So the magnetization curve for a material looks something like this. depending on a number of properties. It's got some, whoops, that should go like that. It's got some sort of a hysteresis, which means that the going up is not the same as going down. And there's going to be a bunch of these curves depending on your frequency. And, oh man, this is a horrible drawing. Let me try and draw that a bit better, and I'll just actually maybe cut to the chase. The transfer function of a magnetizable material looks something like this when you average out the frequencies and the various different hysteresis curves. It looks something like this. And so we've got sort of a linear section up here, and we've got this knee here that we want to try and get rid of. The way we're going to get rid of that knee is by feeding in a high frequency carrier signal that will allow our signal to have this gap between it, the top and the bottom. So we've pushed our signal, we've fattened out the 0 point, is another way of looking at it, so that when this signal comes in, this signal comes out. So we've got this fat section that gets averaged out through the transfer function of our tape. And I'll put a link to a really nice paper that the folks at 3M did, or Scotch, I forget which, who. Anyways, they gave me the idea for this diagram, and it's a really great way of thinking of transfer functions and how you can get a signal here through a nonlinear medium by trying to get around this nonlinear section of it, even though you have to have something on both the high end and the low end. So you can think of the signal going up and down like this, and then on the output it just comes up and down like that. And that's AC biasing. So this carrier signal here, that's the 100 kilohertz or better signal, and this signal here is our data signal, for lack of a better word. Our audio that we want to encode. So that's tape biasing in a nutshell. Now, the other thing that happens is there is high frequency, low amplitude passages will have very low magnetization, and you've got to change that magnetization from positive and negative very quickly. So when you've got a high frequency, low amplitude signal, you've got a problem with tape hiss still. And that's due to the randomization, the not being able to fully randomize and de-randomize, according to your signal, the tape values. So what happens in that case is you have a collection of compression filters that are, or one filter that is frequency dependent and amplitude dependent, so that you get a stronger signal at certain frequencies and certain amplitudes. So that as your amplitude goes up, it becomes more or less flat, and as your frequency increases, you get more and more emphasis being placed on your signal. So for the frequencies down here, so down at around 20 hertz, at the lower end of human hearing, all of these functions are almost identical. But way up here, when we're up at the 20 kilohertz range, if you've got a very low input signal, you're going to emphasize it more than if you've got a high amplitude input signal. So loud, fast frequencies don't get as much emphasis as quiet, fast, or quiet, high frequencies. And that's your Dolby encoding. And there's a bunch of different ways that they did it, and Dolby A and B, and then all kinds of stuff. But anyways, that is why I was doomed to fail. What I have to have done is I would have had to, this would be what the black box diagram would look like. So if this is audio in on my from my tape, I would have to have, first of all, a Dolby compressor to compress the circuit. Then I would have had to make a circuit to do bias equalization, so that I could pretend that the signal was actually being read from a tape before I actually try and put that signal into where the read head would go in. And this turn out to be what that TSOP 40 chip was doing, and I found the various inputs and outputs on that. What is this? 25, and I think this was 30. Anyways, the pins on that TSOP were left and right in, and then there was a couple of ground pins over here. And anyways, all of this stuff is what was in that chip that I was able to find the input and output inputs for, or sorry, the outputs from, that would then go off to your amplification circuit. So this goes off to your amplifier. Sorry, output there. So yeah, that's why I was doomed to, I could not try and go in here. I have to try and go in at these points. Well, it was fun. I learned something. I don't know if that explanation helped anybody out there understand what the hell I did, but there it is. Thanks for watching.